Hello, and welcome to Limelight Arts Travels podcast, A Closer Look. Twice every summer, Siena hosts one of Italy's best-known regional festivals, the Palio, a mad horse race around the shell-shaped Piazza del Campo. With bright costumes and liveried horses in a medieval style, flag tossing and a courtly pennant as prize for the winning horse that represents each neighbourhood, it's hard to think of a more colourful celebration of local life in Italy. The Campo, once an open space as its name, field, suggests, is the perfect stage for this pageantry. And yet, a closer look at its history and design reveals the way in which it came to represent a place to do government in common in a time of great conflict between factions, families, and neighbours. In this episode, Limelight's Dr. Nick Gordon sits down with historian of medieval and Renaissance Italy, Dr. Nick Eckstein, to find out more.
Well, welcome back, Nick.
Nice to be here again, Nick.
Yes, and today we're changing cities. We're moving away from Florence to its near neighbour, Siena. And here we're looking at the Campo, which is one of the most famous, as well as most beautiful squares in all of Italy, if not of Europe. But we're going to find out today that there's a lot more about the square, about its history, about what it meant to the people who constructed it and lived in it. So from the angle that you're looking at the square now, Nick, what are the key things that you notice first?
One of the wonderful things about Siena is that if you haven't been there before and you haven't seen it from the air, you don't know what you're about to encounter. The streets are winding and narrow. It's one of those so-called unplanned medieval cities. If you're in Florence, you feel very happy as a Melburnian because it's a grid. At least the old city is a grid, all at right angles, mostly anyway. And so it's very negotiable and you can see things coming. As I've just said, Siena is built on three hillsides. It's actually originally an Etruscan settlement. It also has a Roman origin as well, but Etruscans tended to build on hills. And so it's a lot of the major streets follow the snaking, winding course of the hillsides on which they are built, and they've just been accreted with buildings and so on over the decades and centuries. When you arrive first at the Campo, as they nickname it, Piazza del Campo, just referred to as the Campo, you don't know you're there. You actually have to walk through one of a series of tunnels. And this is one of those dirty tricks you can play on your group if you're a leader. So you've arranged to get there late in the day and the sun is low and the colours are beautiful if you're lucky enough to have good weather. And then this is one of the pleasures of taking groups because you get to see people's first impressions as they walk into one of these tunnels and enter the piazza and are taken all at once with one of the most beautiful and majestic urban sites you can find anywhere on the planet. Just like taking people into Venice for the first time, people are overwhelmed because you can't prepare yourself for something with which there is very little or indeed no comparison. So I'm looking at a view such as you get through one of these entrances, and what I can see is a vast space around which there is a grey stone, and we'll call it a course because that is where the horses in the famous event, the horse race called the Palio, is run twice a year on two different holidays associated with the Virgin. This is the city of the Virgin. Mary is the patron saint of Siena. So you can see that course around 360 degrees of this irregular shape. In the center is a shell-like shape entirely paved with red brick. The view I'm looking at has no human beings in it. There's the odd vehicle, but there are no people. So it must be very, very early in the morning, I think. And what I can see ringing the piazza, the reason you can't see it before you get there, is that it's ringed by aristocratic palaces belonging to the powerful families who ran this city. I'm speaking of government, in that sense, ran the city in the 13th, 14th and 15th centuries. families that rejoice in surnames like Salimbeni, Tolomei, and so on. What's dominating my site, though, is the most extraordinary town hall you will ever see. It's called the Public Palace, Palazzo Pubblico. In Italy, palazzo basically just means a large building. It doesn't literally mean palace. That's how we've adopted it. But a palazzo can be a block of flats in modern Italy. In the period we're talking about, it can be a vast private dwelling, which we would call certainly a palace, or it can be a town hall. And I'm looking at the famous Palazzo Pubblico, which is the seat of the civic government in the medieval period. In the middle of my view, at the left-hand end of the Palazzo Pubblico, is a vertiginously tall tower. I can't give you the meterage, consult your blue guide, but it's called the Torre del Mangia. Mangia is M-A-N-G-I-A. And that is a watchtower. Like the piazza, the Palazzo Pubblico is a ruddy brick colour. So is the majority of the Torre del Mangia, which has white pale stone at the top. So it's like a kind of medieval candlestick, but very, very high, very, very imposing. And I'm here to tell you, kind of nauseating to look down from if you decide to climb to the top. If you don't like heights, don't do this. If you don't mind heights, do it, because the view is absolutely breathtaking. In both senses of the word breathtaking. I'm not fond of heights. Anyway, so you've got crenellations along the top of the Palazzo Pubblico, such as you might see in a medieval castle in the countryside. When you are elected to a specific term as a councillor in a government like this, you will spend that term in the Palazzo Pubblico, making your decisions ostensibly in the interests of the common good, the bene comune, as it's called. Now, I just described a rather idealized world. Of course, it's got all of the pitfalls, weaknesses, hypocrisies.
All those different checks and balances to try and
exactly right. That's right.
However, the rules people come up with. First,
that's right.
You've evoked how the architecture is not accidental, that the architecture surrounding the piazza has very specific meanings for the people who built it and who would be looking at it. Is that extended into the piazza as well? And yes, the different ways that symbolism is built into the space.
What's going on this piazza? I said it's in the shape of a shell. Now, say something about what people read into that significance. The reason it's in the shape of a shell is because that's the shape of the space between the three hills I referred to. This is neutral space. Now, I was giving a slightly idealized portrait a moment ago of the communal government and why people citizens who belong to communal governments are so proud of them. I should add, they are in the late 13th and for much of the 14th century, often quite violent places. There are lots and lots of factions. Neighbourhoods are often dominated by powerful families. And the commune is an attempt to modify, suppress the particular interests of powerful families who would seek to dominate the city in their own interests. So the Piazza del Campo, this space between the three cities, is neutral space. And that's why you find the civic heart. That's why the government is located here. Piazza del Campo, by the way, means Piazza of the Meadow. Campo means meadow. So this is a low-lying, swampy area originally. Then it's drained, of course, and paved, and you have these wonderful red bricks, as you can see everywhere. So let's be clear. It's a place which is deemed to be outside the faction fighting and backbiting that characterize so much of the social relations and indeed the politics of 13th and early 14th century Siena. And when I say 13th to 14th, I actually should be going back to even further, because we've got a long history of how communal governments come into existence. The layout of the Piazza del Campo itself embodies symbolism of one of the most famous of the communal governments I'm talking about. A government called the Council of Nine, the government of the Nove, whose adherents are called Noveschi. So you'll find a lot of councils, not just in Siena, in this period, take their name from the number of councillors who officiated. In this case, there are 9 priors or governors, whichever you want to call them. So it's called the government of the 9, the Nove. The Nove are in charge from 1287 until 1355. So this is the oligarchical government that controls Siena in the late Middle Ages. Now, they are driven from office in 1355, and there follows quite a lot of chaos, a lot of instability. There's actually a despot from Milan, Gian Galeazzo Visconti is his name, and he takes over for several years as of 1399. The Sienese, that is the powerful, the wealthy merchant type of citizens and families who control the commune, take over again as of 1404. Because it was the government of the 9, they arranged the Campo in 9 slices of pie. You might say, if you look at an aerial vision of the Piazza del Campo, you will notice that bricked area I'm talking about in front of the Palazzo Pubblico actually is arranged in points that converge upon the main entrance of the town hall. So 9 is actually bricked into the piazza, and people who built it know this. So the Piazza del Campo, belongs to the government of the 9. It is a product of that moment in Sienese communal history. The Palazzo Pubblico, by its mere existence there, its powerful facade, its presence, its function as the seat of communal government, is another symbolic statement of the power of wealthy citizens over their own destiny rather than the power of a despot. The palaces that ring this space belong to the members of the class who control that oligarchy. Now, I keep on using the word oligarchy, and I should define it just a little bit. To be a citizen in Florence or Siena or any of these places, you have to fulfill a number of criteria. So let's not pretend these are modern democracies in any sense. I speak at a moment when modern democracies themselves are in a rather precarious state. But let's just take as read by democracy, we mean the kind of arrangement we have in Australia, where basically people have one vote and each vote is worth the same as everybody else's vote, and we return to Parliament a more or less democratic representation of the collective will of voters. I know it doesn't quite work out in practice, but we have something perhaps arguably closer to that ideal than many other places on the planet. My point is, that's not how it works in Siena. To be a citizen, you've guessed it, you've got to be a man. Second, you have to be a member of a guild. Now, a guild is not a union. A guild is more like a chamber of manufacturers or an employers association. I said employer, not employee. So there's a wool guild which runs the wool industry. There is a banking guild which runs the banking industry. If you are a worker, you'll be subject to the authority of the guild that controls the industry in which you work, but you won't have a say in it. To have a say in the government, you've got to be one of the people who belongs to the guild, who's therefore very likely to be better off, if not wealthy, and is therefore you're a guild member, you're a man, and you pay tax, and you're up to date with your tax. If you fulfill those three, actually, I didn't realize the inherent humor in saying, and that you pay your tax. These are two different things, aren't they? If you're up to date with your tax, and you are a male, and you are a guild member, then you are part of the politically eligible class. In a place like Siena or Florence in the 13th, 14th century, that means you're a member of a group called the people, the popolo. It's not a neutral term meaning people, it's a politically charged word. The popolo is the class of politically eligible males who make up the state and from whom are drawn the councillors who will sit for their limited terms in the Palazzo Pubblico. Just so you know, between about 2/5 and a third of the population is eligible for that class in this period. So it's elitist, certainly, but here's an interesting fact. The politically active section of the Sienese community, pro rata, is larger than the politically active population in Australia. The number of people as a proportion of the population who get into office in Siena in the 14th century is much, much higher than the percentage of people who get into an Australian parliament. It's worth thinking about.
No. And then thinking then that kind of you have this, no doubt, an immense sense of pride in that political status, in being a member of that political elite, but not an elite in the way we necessarily think of it. We're seeing that it's kind of expressed in the architecture, in borrowing, as you mentioned earlier as well, borrowing castle architecture, very kind of visually drawing on kind of a pre-existing way of expressing power through stone. But you've also got the pride in the square itself, and the facades of the buildings surrounding it, creating that amphitheatre. Is it deliberately conceived of as a stage, or do you think there's a sense of performativeness that is just implicit in the way people think in the period thought?
I think both are in a sense true. I don't think Italians of this period who live in this setting can imagine any other way of behaving than that they live as much on the streets as they do in their private dwellings. So nowhere in the city better exemplifies the fact than this piazza, which, as I haven't mentioned, and which I think you want me to mention, is the place where one of the most famous outdoor rituals of all Italy is performed to this day twice a year. There, on the Feast of the Annunciation and on another date on the annual calendar, which is specific to a Sienese saint, they run what is called the Palio, Palio. Palio actually refers to a cloth, a festive cloth, which is often awarded as a prize in a tournament. A palio can also be the name for the drape over an altar in a church. So that's what a palio means. It's given its name to this race, so that when people these days hear palio, if they're not from Italy, they'll think horse race in Siena. This is a fascinating event, which in terms of local enthusiasm leaves rugby league and AFL in its wake. If we think Australians are fanatical about rugby league and AFL, you don't know medieval Siena. And for that matter, you don't know modern Siena. It's not much of an exaggeration to say that native Sienese, and I'm talking about now, and it was as much the case in the period we're talking about as well, people are either preparing for the next Palio or recovering from the one that's just been run. And I need to explain how the Palio runs. It's a horse race, certainly, but it's not just a horse race. It is an emblematic performance of the neighbourhood relations of this entire city. The city of Siena, as I mentioned before, is built across three hills with that neutral space of the Piazza del Campo in the middle. What I haven't mentioned already is that the city is further divided into a series of 17 neighbourhoods. In Siena, these neighbourhoods are called contrade, C-O-N-T-R-A-D-E. Now, every city in the period has neighbourhoods of this kind. Florence has them. They go by different names there. In Siena, they are absolutely crucial in describing both the patterns of life and the self-sense of identity that Sienese have of themselves. You could say without very much exaggeration that before you are a city of Siena, you are a citizen of the contrada in which you live. They owe their existence to old military companies, militias indeed, that in that earlier, more violent period of the city's history, acted as urban defence militias. And this is why they go by such colourful names, because they take their names from the old banners of the military companies, which were based in neighbourhoods and which protected the local population from those particularist ambitions of families and forces that didn't want to belong to the commune. So they have fabulous names. There is a contrada called Aquila, the eagle, another called Chiocciola, the snail, one called the dragon, Drago, another contrada called Civetta, which means the owl, and I could go on. So there are 17 of those. Each of these neighbourhoods has an extraordinary sense of itself, a very powerful esprit de corps, of which people are immensely proud. So you are a proud citizen of the contrada of the seashell, for instance, or you might be an absolutely patriotic citizen of Tartuca, the tortoise. And you are brought up from the time you are young to regard yourself as a citizen of your contrada, and you have performatively and to some extent genuine antipathy towards the inhabitants of neighbouring contrade. Also, you might find yourself friendly with the population of the contrada that is next but one to you, because the other contrada next to you is between. So your friends, your enemy's enemy is your friend. There is an extraordinary lattice of hostilities, friendships, and so on that unfolds across the Sienese urban landscape because of these very, very complicated relationships. Why am I telling you this? Because one of the ways this plays itself out in symbolic form, in a very cathartic way, is by running an originally military tournament called the Palio. Each one of the contrade fields a horse. And one of the greatest honours you can have is to be asked to be the jockey for the horse. These days they often bring jockeys out from elsewhere. But the idea is that you will compete on behalf of your contrada in the Palio for the prize of beating every one of your neighbours.
And it's just returning to where you began on the story of of that element of surprise when you're bringing people into this space for the first time. That there's also a sense, as you're pointing to in Siena and in other similarly scaled cities, that the road, although you can't see where you're going, you know it will take you where you need to go. Or if you just deposited yourself in an alleyway, you would know which road, which path to follow to take you out onto the main thoroughfare. So there's that repeated human action that the city's built up around, which I think is a fabulous way of understanding a city like Siena. And thank you very much for being able to bring that very difficult point to to draw out of something that we feel in a place like this, but it can find it quite difficult to rationalise how we feel that way. But
it's important, I think, to do that without romanticising the city, because the tourist gaze can be a very self-indulgent one. But I do think that these things really are embedded somehow in the mechanics of the way these cities work. And if the Italians have a particular genius, they have many, one of their particular geniuses is in the way they make their cities work in this way. I would extend that to cover much of the Mediterranean, I think, as well, and a lot of Europe. But Italy is collectively very good at this kind of thing, I think.
You've been listening to Limelight Arts Travels podcast, A Closer Look. It was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land and their elders past and present.